Well, welcome to today's webinar. It's called Driving Servitization Success with B2B Voice of Customer Skills. And we're delighted to be offering this at the AIM Institute because we have some new friends at the Advanced Services Group. And we just started working with them over the last couple of months. But it's kind of one of those, if some of you are fans of Reese's Peanut Butter Cup, you get the chocolate and the peanut butter and get it together, it gets even better. Well, that's the way we look at this thing. And so let me just describe a little bit about why we're excited about the approach and the ability to work with the Advanced Services Group. So as you know, in blueprinting, the main thing we do is our interviews, right? These qualitative and quantitative interviews, put together a market case, maybe do some extra work, but basically go for developing a new product and then launching it to glory and honor for all involved. And as many of you already know, it's all about really understanding those customers' outcomes around the job to be done. And then after we figure out what the correct outcomes are, then we work on the solutions. Well, we were delighted to see that Advanced Services Group is really into understanding outcomes as well. That's their terminology. That's the way they think. But what's fun is when they get to the solutions, it's about services. And when we first started new product blueprinting, I'm not sure I'd use the word product anymore. Many of our clients, of course, do make hydraulic cylinders and polymers and physical articles. But today, more and more, they're looking to develop services, either in conjunction with those physical articles or even by themselves, and even sometimes entirely new business models. And I think this is the way that things are going to continue going. Because if we look at this from the customer's perspective, they have to figure out where to buy, and then they have to buy the stuff. But then they have to be concerned with the actual operation after they buy something from us, but also post-operation. And I think I have been guilty, and maybe many other manufacturing-oriented people, of really just thinking about how do they use our product. That's the scope, that's the job to be done. But golly, there's all kinds of other stuff. How do you maintain it and repair it? And how do you dispose of it? And so on and so forth. So that's why we're excited to be working with Advanced Services Group and kind of telling our clients about, what they do, because they can really expand the scope of the discussion on how we might be able to help the customer. And so to help us do that, I'd like to introduce to you one of our new friends and our guest speaker, Parikshit Naik, and he is an absolute expert in developing service-led business models. His background is engineering and innovation management. He's got a PhD in IoT, Internet of Things, enabled servitization. So he's spent a little time thinking about this, as you might tell. He gets really excited and is really good at helping clients develop these attractive, customer-centric, outcome-based services. So, Parikshit, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. It is an absolute delight to have you with us. Let me go ahead and let you share your screen. And as we get into this, everybody, since we've got a very small, manageable group here, let's keep it informal. You can certainly put questions in the chat, but if you want to, Parikshit said it's fine to interrupt you, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And ask a question as we go. And then, of course, we'll allow some time at the end. And I'm eager to see what we've got here to cover. So thank you, Parikshit. I will turn off my camera and listen in rapt attention. Here we go.
Thanks a lot, Dan. And it is absolutely a pleasure to be with you all today. And thank you for the chance to speak to you. Thanks to Dan and the AIM Institute. And if I come off slightly distracted, it might be because Dan mentioned Reese's Buttercups at the start of the conversation. I'm still thinking about them. I haven't had those in a while. So to talk about today, Dan very rightly mentioned, it is about exploring the opportunities to create value beyond just the physical article, while using the physical article to deliver that value. And we are seeing increasingly more and more manufacturing organizations getting into this across different industries, across different regions. So I'll talk to you a bit more about how to drive service and business model innovation. We'll first start with why we are seeing businesses start to compete differently, and what are the common three ways that businesses tend to compete in. How does that turn into this complicated word called servitization? Then how does that result in innovating your business models and creating new services? Towards the end, I also have some examples of businesses that have done this successfully and have become sort of the pioneers or the poster children of the world of servitization. So to start with, how does this work together as voice of customer and innovation? We start with, why do businesses compete differently? We went into a lot of research. That's what we do. We are driven by a research center in our background. So while looking at competitive strategies and what are the most common ways businesses try to be the best in their market, there's few that would go for, let's say we want to be the best price or the lowest cost competitor in the market. There's some who would want to be the best performing product in the market. And there's some who would want to have a best overall package in the market. That would be their stance for a competitive advantage, that this is how we will be different from anybody else. Some will also have a combination of all three as a focus, which could also mean there is slightly a lack of focus there if you are trying to do all the things at the same time. Now, we've picked those two cars. Not sure you know both of them very well for a very specific reason. So best price, you're looking at the Tata Nano, which was launched by Tata, one of India's biggest car manufacturing firms, as the cheapest car ever to be created. So I think it costs about, when it was launched, it was about $1,200 or $1,300, a cheap family car. Now, while it was the cheapest, it wasn't performing the best. There were loads and loads of faults that were reported. Some of the cars caught fire while in operation. So you could really see the reputational damage that this could have caused. Whereas they were trying to capture the market with being this pioneering cheap alternative to big cars. The next one, best product, best performance, that's the Mini Cooper. Now, it is very popular in the UK, especially here. And as people started buying more and more of them, they realized there are a lot of maintenance issues, and the maintenance becomes more and more expensive. All the spare parts and everything, availability wasn't that great when it hit the market. Now it is not really just manufactured by Mini. So that's a different story. But just being the best performance didn't mean they were the best in the market either. So people started looking more at best package. So we took that and we created a survey to understand, do businesses really try and compete through these three different ways? And if they do, where do they see their business right now? And where do they see their business in the future, let's say 5 years down the line, on this scale of product, price versus package? And you can do this yourself. It's called unlockyourinsight.co.uk. And we had 475 responses over 4 years of data collection. And what we found is the pink line is the current strategic focus. A lot of the businesses that we spoke to had a focus on package. But increasingly in the future, that focus on package was much higher than anything on product and price. The price argument became almost negligible in this conversation. So what does this mean? How do you create an all-around package to achieve competitive advantage in a very cutthroat market of manufacturing? That is when we came across the world of servitization and what that means. And to give you sort of an example of how this works in sales environments, traditionally, we see the world as there's a manufacturer and there's a customer. And the manufacturer thinks, well, what can we really make? What are we very good at? We can make very good drills. Okay, then they go to the market and say, hello, we are an excellent drill manufacturer. Would you like to please buy our drills? Whereas the customer in a second box is thinking, well, what do we really need? Then they say, well, we want some holes to put down cables. Their business is to lay down cables in the roads. I said, okay, well, this drill can help us make those cables. Let's try and see how that works out for us. So they go to the market and they buy these drills. Now, in a different environment of what we call a very servitized solution, the relationship is different at the start itself. The manufacturer and the customer tend to be in a closer relationship, and the conversation starts on a very different note. The manufacturer asks the customer, how can we help you succeed? It's not about what can we make very well. It's to first start with, how can we help you succeed? Well, the customer says, we want to be able to make holes reliably. Otherwise, we lose business. That's our core activity. That's what we want to do. Said, okay, excellent. We are experts in drills. Let's go create a solution where we can guarantee you that you can make those holes that you need in the ground so you can lay the cables that you need. And the customer thinks, well, excellent. Now I don't have to worry about a business process that is not critical to my success. It is the necessary evil, for the lack of a better terminology. And then they create a new solution. Now, this co-created solution that is well aligned with the outcomes that the customer wants to achieve are what we see as outcome-based services. Now, what does it mean for a business or an organization if they've always been selling products as they are, and now they are wondering, how do we start creating these outcome-based services? So we asked this gentleman, Des Evans. Des was the CEO of MAN Trucks. Put a small picture on the right-hand side of the trucks that they supply. Across the world, MAN Trucks are quite popular, especially in Europe, a huge footprint. And Des was responsible for taking MAN Trucks, which had a market position of about 9th in the UK, to 3rd, and entirely driven by not just product sales. His agenda was, if we want to sustain this, we need to start competing differently in the market. We cannot just be dependent on the technical specifications and excellence of our product. We need to demonstrate excellence in delivering customer success. So they went through a transformation, and we asked Des that, can you describe what your business went through, what you had to take the business through in order to achieve this? And we made a word cloud of that after about a year of spending time with him and his organization. And as you can see, it's a mess. The word cloud is basically a mess. It was very complicated to understand, but as we started digging deeper and bringing structure to it, we realized that this is a very comprehensive organizational transformation. And that transformation of a business moving away from being a product-centric organization to a more customer-centric service organization is the process of servitization. The word is not something we have created. The word has existed since 1980s from the US, actually. Servitization was coined as this transformation from a very commercial perspective of generating wealth, having a new revenue stream, and it had other overlaps. We started seeing servitization pop up in Scandinavia and in continental Europe with a focus on environmental regulations, that how it can help reduce the carbon footprint and dematerialize supply chains. But overall, the messages were the same. It is a different way of competing. It is a way of innovating your business models. So what it really is it is a transformation that enables new offerings. It requires, of course, a new business model to go to the market with, and it supports a business-led strategy. So if you do want to service-led business strategy, so if you do want to compete through services, this is a very effective way to go for that. At the bottom is a very academic definition that is quite widely used now, that it is a transformation process moving away from just products alone to a combination of products and services. Now, to get deeper into what kind of these services, what are these services and what they look like, we'll get into a bit more of that. But as you start going through servitization, the outcome of this transformation is a new business model. And a simple way of looking at business models is a 4-quadrant piece. The top left-hand side, where it says customer value proposition, is how do you create value? The top right-hand side is how do you deliver that value? So what kind of resources and competencies do you require to deliver it? Then the bottom left-hand side is how do you capture value? What is the revenue model here? How do you earn money from this and other forms of value? And finally, as a result of that, how do you gain a competitive advantage? If we look at the business models this way, you could break down your current business models in the same way you could break a service business model and innovative business model that way as well. And the whole conversation started going, where do we start in this 4 quadrants? A lot of businesses want to start on outcome-based business models with the idea that, oh, we have seen Netflix working very well. We want to create a subscription model as well. If you want to create a subscription model, what you're creating is a value capture process. It is only a revenue model. It doesn't necessarily explain how do you create extra value for the customers. Some businesses very often say, oh, we have a brilliant digital technology. We have connected our products. We want to start selling this connectivity. We want to monetize the data. Well, if you want to monetize the data and if you want to monetize connectivity, you're looking at how you deliver value. The connectivity sits as your resource and competence. Are you trying to just sell your resource, or are you trying to sell the outcome that this resource generates? And therefore, the focus became, we have to start with the customer value proposition. And when we work with businesses to help them design these business models, we spend about 60% of our time digging deeper into the value proposition. And the idea is, if that stacks up well, it is very likely that the delivery system and the value capture process will align itself as well, because they don't need to be radically different. The businesses already tend to have a lot of resources and competencies, and they have expertise in how do they price their offerings. It is really what is the offering we are trying to sell that needs to change in this context. Now, going deeper into that value proposition, what kind of value propositions can we create? At the very low level, if you look at this graph, you will see the orange steps. These orange ones are what we call base services. Then the pink ones are what we call intermediate services, and the blue ones are what we call advanced services. Now, you might ask me the question, the first step says product, how did you call that a service? Now, this sits in what we call as service dominant logic. It might be controversial to some who have a very strong product base, but let's explore that a bit further. What does it really mean? The idea of service dominant logic is that everything is a service. The product is only a vehicle to deliver the service. For example, the chair that I'm sitting on, I didn't want the chair because I like to have chairs, unless you do just like to own chairs. I got the chair because I want to sit on it to achieve an outcome of having comfortable working space. And that's why the product could be considered a service. Taking that as an example, if we have a product at the base level, most of the manufacturers have their product to supply. Some of them will also have product spares or the consumables that go around it. Then they will also have break fix services, where if something goes wrong with the product, they will repair it. And then they might also have assured maintenance services, where if something goes wrong with the product, within a certain period of time, they will come and fix it. They will guarantee to the customer that much performance from their services. After that, things start getting more and more complex and interesting. I've put small ticks around those first 4 steps. These are the 4 steps we see very commonly existing within the industry across many different sectors and countries. Beyond that is where more innovation starts happening. Now, performance advisory is where we see manufacturers helping the customer extract maximum value out of their products. Then comes the advanced services, where you start guaranteeing the outcome that comes from the products. So whether it's the asset capability itself, so what the product can do for you, or the process capability. So the process in which a product sits, can you guarantee the outcome of that entire process? Or finally, the business platform. Can you guarantee the outcomes of the business for which the product works? The higher up you go, the more risk you start absorbing, as you can see on the x-axis at the bottom. But at the same time, by absorbing more risk, you're adding more value. to the customer, as you can see on the y-axis. And that is the whole objective of this staircase. It is to demonstrate how product-led businesses who might have their positioning at the very bottom of the staircase can go to the top, and that journey itself is called servitization. Now, to go into some examples, I'll tell you a bit more about MAN Trucks, Goodyear Tires, and Alstom, who have developed value propositions that sit on different steps of the staircase. And it'll probably make this a bit more real for you. So if we look at Goodyear Tires, we worked with, I think Dan knows Jim, probably, Jim Eichner. And
Yes.
we've worked with Jim for a long, long time. And Jim was the VP of Innovation for Goodyear Tires in Europe. And the idea was, we make these massive black things with a hole in the middle. How do we deliver outcomes out of that? What are the outcomes that our customers want? And it was really that latter part. What do our customers want? The voice of customer was what was driving the innovation here. And as Jim and his team started digging deeper into this, they realized the customers are looking for anything that can help them stay on the road. Their trucks are haulage companies that are carrying perishable goods or fuel or any other form of goods across the country. So the best value you can deliver to them is to make sure that their truck stays on the road, because every yard that it spends broken down, it is damaging the product inside it, or it is reducing the outcomes of its end customer. So, okay, how can we make sure that the trucks are on the road? The biggest problem is tire breakdown. There's a puncture, there's a blowout, they are deflated tires, or they are losing grip. So they are not really roadworthy tires. So if we want to reduce that, what can we do for the customer? And they started monitoring these parameters increasingly. So of course, very driven by digital technology, but it wasn't about monetizing the digital technology. It was about helping the customer achieve outcomes using the digital technology. So they would monitor tire pressure real time. They had a fleet support network as well. So within the UK, there were some of these offices of the haulage companies where if a truck is getting into the yard, it would go over a certain set of sensors. And every time it would go over that, it would capture all of the data required and help those companies make decisions about when to inflate the tire, if it's at risk, is there anything we need to do to make sure the tire stays on the road? And that helped them generate a lot of value. Today, Goodyear Proactive Solutions, you can probably Google that, is a hugely profitable business for Goodyear. And it, of course, drives more tire sale as well, which is great for the business. But that wasn't really the objective. The objective was to help the businesses, their customers, achieve better outcomes. Looking at MAN Truck, we spoke about Des Evans. And, well, what was the proposition Des really made? They went to the customer and started digging deep into what makes the customer successful and what are their biggest pain points. And they had this pyramid of total cost of ownership. They first thought that their truck is absolutely mission critical to the customer's business. The customer's business is against haulage companies taking lots and lots of goods around the country. And they realized at the top, you can see a new truck only is 10% of the TCO for the company. So really, it is critical, but it doesn't cost them a lot to just replace a truck. What is the biggest pain is the 45% you see at the bottom, which is fuel. So they realized that we want to help them reduce fuel cost instead of reducing truck cost. We're not trying to make the truck cheaper. We're trying to make running the truck better or cheaper. So how do we do that? We cannot, of course, sell them cheap fuel. That's not our business. So what can we do best? And they realized that a lot of the fuel consumption is due to bad truck behavior or bad truck driving. So how can we improve their driver performance? They created a performance advisory service. So it is still not advanced service, but a performance advisory service where they were monitoring truck performance and truck driver performance, checking their cornering, checking their braking, how they change gears, what is their turning angles, and so on. And they started grading them on a list A to G. Now, the G is a bit harsh, saying you will be kicked out if you're on G. But the objective wasn't to find who they should be firing, but it was to find which driver they should be improving. And they would go back to the customer and say, over the past year, we have found there are X number of drivers who are in E range. And by taking them from E to C, we can improve your fuel consumption from X to Y%. This means this many £1,000 over the entire year of value add to you. Now, would you like to buy a new truck, or would you like us to help you improve your business performance by training your drivers better on how to use our trucks? And this was extremely successful. As I said, it helped Des, the CEO, take MAN trucks from 9th in the UK to 3rd. And you will see he is called Des Evans OBE. The OBE stands for a royal award that he was given for his contribution to the automotive industry, just through creating such services and really establishing a competitive advantage. The third example is what we see as a true advanced service now. Now, this is between Alstom Trains and Virgin Trains. Alstom Trains are a manufacturer of trains worldwide, French headquarters. And Virgin Trains are, of course, the service provider that run these trains. It started off as a conversation between Alstom and Virgin in the UK especially, where Virgin had just received a contract to run a train line, a very critical train line today as well, between London and Glasgow, so from England to Scotland. And this train line required Virgin to have perfect availability of trains, deliver perfect performance throughout. And they realized we actually don't know anything about train maintenance, how to run trains, how to keep them up to date. If anything goes wrong, what do we do? Do we have to build this capability within our business? That's a big cost. That's a lot of time. We don't have it. The government has given us a contract. We have to go. So they went to Alstom and they said, listen, your trains are brilliant. Can you run them for us? We are not really interested in running the trains. We are interested in selling tickets. So Alstom and Virgin came up with a contract of essentially mobility as a service instead of selling trains. And as a result of this contract, Alstom was responsible for making sure there are 52 trains facing the correct direction every single day, for Virgin to just sell the tickets and get ready to put the passengers on it. Virgin put the train driver on the train, they sold the tickets, and they put the coffee and the tea on the train. Recently, just a year ago, this contract between Virgin and the government for this line expired, and it was passed on to a new train operator called Avanti West Coast. Now, Avanti came into the game and they realized this is a great model, and we are very similar to Virgin. We don't have this expertise. And they just borrowed the entire model and continued the contract with Alstom and said, yeah, let's just keep going. We'll do the exact same thing. You're doing great. And what it actually delivers is now Avanti West Coast get a guarantee from Virgin that if their trains are not available as per contractual agreements, they are ready to take a penalty. So in the UK, if I am on this train and the train is delayed by more than 30 minutes, I am allowed to claim a full refund on my ticket. Now, if this train is delayed more than 30 minutes due to a technical fault, which falls under Alstom's responsibilities, Alstom pays that fine straight to Virgin, who pays, or Avanti West Coast, who will pay me back. But if it is not due to a technical fault, and if it is because the train operator doesn't have the staff or something has gone wrong on their side, that's their problem. Alstom still gets paid. And their revenue model was based on every successful journey that they can conduct for the train operator from one point to another point. And that's how they started creating an advanced service, which was to guarantee customer asset capability. It wasn't about selling product spare parts, maintenance. It was all inclusive of that with a guarantee, a contractual guarantee. And that's where we see a lot more of these manufacturers moving in. not just equipment manufacturers, but we are seeing this across industries. More and more businesses are saying, we aren't really interested in selling our products for a number of reasons. Of course, one of them is we want to differentiate ourselves in the market. Another one is we want to demonstrate that we can help reduce the carbon emissions, and services are a great way to do that, because if you are operating the asset, or if you're maintaining the asset on behalf of the customer, you can make sure that it is at the top condition and creating as less of carbon emissions as possible. And some also want to make it more accessible to wider population. If an asset is very expensive, these type of contracts help you make them more accessible to other parties as well. So as you can see, a very big contract, and it helped Virgin create a lot more business as well. They have 140% increase in their passenger numbers, and now which is being benefited by Avanti West Coast, the new operator. And there's a video on YouTube. If you Google Alstom Trains and Virgin Trains partnership, there's a great video that talks about their partnership over 15 years or something. And one key quote from one of the train directors, the operational directors, is every day we have, or every week we have team meetings where we decide how the assets are performing, what we need to improve, and so on. And in that room, we have Virgin people and we have Alstom people, but we cannot really tell who's who, because everybody is working towards the same outcome. And that's a great example, a great demonstration of how this changes that relationship. If you saw at the start, I showed the two circles that were almost combined into each other with the customer and the manufacturer. This relationship really demonstrates that that was the aim for Alstom. And as I said, it really helps you change the business model through these value propositions. For example, with Alstom or with MAN, they were of course able to make the customer more successful, but they were also able to then put the correct resources and competencies in place to enable that value proposition. And aligned with that, they had an innovative way of being charged for these, or charging the customer for these services that they deliver. Whether it's purely outcome-based, it doesn't have to be. It can still be a very traditional form of value recognition, but it gives you the opportunity to generate revenue in innovative ways as well. And that's what the business model innovation is all about. And the service innovation sitting in that top left-hand side box up there. And I think that's what really I wanted to talk to you about today, is how do these service innovations and business model innovation are really driven by the voice of customer. And having worked with Dan, we understood that you all have excellent skills and are on the way to develop these excellent skills with voice of customer exercises. And we had Dan speak to some of our customers just last week, and everybody realized that this is some of the most comprehensive ways that we have seen with the new product blueprinting technique of doing voice of customer. Servitization and these advanced services are a very good way of using those voice of customer results to bring to the market a very different form of offering. It is not just to influence product design or new product development, but also to influence how can we monetize this through a service instead of just selling the product as is. Or how do we change our entire business model using that service innovation angle? And that's what we do. We as Advanced Services Group are experts in that area of what we call servitization. We started off as a research center in Aston Business School in UK, in Birmingham, and we spun out of that and created a commercial entity. So we are led by the scholars, the highest cited scholars in the world on the topic of servitization. And we use that research that we have to generate more digestible forms of support, some of the examples that you saw on the screen, to help businesses go from being a product-led business to becoming more of a successful service provider. And of course, we also partner with companies who want to do this on a long term and become sort of their intellectual partners in this journey, helping them think about their servitization differently, helping them think about their business models differently. So at this point, I'll open it for questions if anybody has, if Dan has any questions. But yes, feel free to contact us as well. You can, at the bottom of the screen, you can see our website and you can find a lot more about us there as well.
Fantastic job, Parikshit. You know, we're still trying to figure out who's the chocolate and who's the peanut butter, but we're very, very well convinced there's a great synergy here. You know, we with our blueprinting clients, they've been doing a great job of getting into customer outcomes, but sometimes it's only about how the customer uses, you know, our polymer, our hydraulic cylinder, whatever. I think the point here is we need to open that up and think about everything the customer needs all the way through end of life. So I have some questions, but I'm not going to be greedy. I'm going to open it up to anybody who wants to unmute or put it in the chat first. And then hopefully I'll have some time for my questions. But anybody else want to start us off? Gary?
Hi, I think it's interesting. One of the customers you showed there was Alstom. I'm working on the sort of clean tech side, and we're working with Alstom on fuel cells, and they're obviously thinking about long term. They're only at the sort of pilot stage at the moment, but they've got to be thinking about how this thing is maintainable. So we're thinking about the fittings and the valves and the infrastructure around that, and whether we put manifolds in to think about the guy that's going to maintain this stuff is not going to be in the factory in the clean conditions, is going to be in the field somewhere on a train by some sidings if he's lucky. So we're trying to think of that when we're looking at solutions, trying to think of the guy who's or woman who's going to be maintaining this thing and where they're going to get the parts from. So it's an interesting insight, particularly with Alstom.
Yeah, definitely. And Gary, just to add a bit to that, another experience from somebody who has gone through a very similar journey. You'll have probably heard of Rolls-Royce and the power by the hour example, the total care solution. So for benefit of others, if you haven't heard, it is the example that Rolls-Royce doesn't really sell engines, but they sell thrust, the power to keep the engine, the airplane in the air, and they get paid for every hour that the engine is in the air. So we worked with Rolls-Royce, and there's a gentleman called Andy Harrison, who was an engineering fellow for Rolls-Royce, and he was instrumental in creating the power by the hour service, but he was from the engineering side, and his objective was designing the product for service, or what he called engineering design for service. And the whole objective was very similar to yours, is the person who's going to maintain this, they need to have access to it, and we need to make it so easy to maintain, because the longer it takes to maintain, the less we are getting paid. And that drove their decisions, that we need to make sure it's quick to fix, anything to be replaced can be easily done, and that they established a standard for this as well. It's called PAS 280. And if I find the link, I'll share it with Dan, and he can forward it, and that might help with this as well.
Yeah, because I started my life in maintenance, so I know what it's like if you can't fix something and you haven't got access to parts, and it's just a nightmare. Yeah,
I can imagine. Thank you.
Great comment. Thank you. Other questions or comments? Well, while you're thinking, let me squeeze one of mine in here, if you don't mind. You know, I was fascinated by your discussion on the value capture. I think one thing that a lot of people who make components or materials struggle with is it's not that hard to come up with your price, you know, for here's what I'm going to charge. I know what the competitors are. Maybe that's not good. Usually it's not a real high price if it's easy to figure it out, right? But that's just as it is. When you get into servitization, and now it's much more complex, how do you do that pricing? And I wanted to see if I've got this right. The thing that I was picking up on in all three of your examples is there were ways of measuring the ultimate success. What's the train uptime? What's the truck uptime with the tires and so forth? So I guess my question is that a common theme is part one, and part two is, does the customer usually already have that measurement in place, or is this part of the servitization coming up with a way of measuring the outcome?
No, that's a very good point, Dan. So I'll start with the second answer first.
Okay.
Yes, servitization is the way, especially when you start going through the process of creating these value propositions. The idea is through the voice of customer exercises and the relationship you build, you start to quantify the value sitting here. And by quantifying this, we mean set a benchmark of what is the customer experiencing as value right now? How much can you elevate that further? And that elevation, once you can quantify it, you now have a KPI that this is what we can contract you to deliver.
Okay.
So we have something called as a business model blueprint, which goes into deeper levels of those 4 quadrants that you saw. So in the blue box, the way we describe the value proposition is you have contracted outcomes, contracted conditions, and risks. Those outcomes are where you can really bring that benchmark higher up. So for example, I'll give you a case where we're working with an equipment manufacturer in the dairy processing industry. So they make homogenizers and separators for milk production. And they went to the customer and they said, did voice of customer exercises. And one question that really stuck there was, what is uptime that you have? And every hour of downtime that you have, how much money do you lose? And the customer had no clue. And so they asked, well, do you know how much downtime you have? They said, oh yeah, we have hours and hours of downtime every month. And that means that the milk that has been in the process has to be rejected because it is halfway processed. It cannot go back into the process. They said, okay, so technically you have lost the raw material. So that's a cost. And you have lost the material that could have been added to the product list at the end of the day. So you have lost that as well. How many bottles do you make per hour? They said, well, we make XYZ bottles. I said, okay, back calculating this, you have lost in an hour these many bottles and this much raw material behind the bottles. That's about $1 million or a few million pounds a year. And they didn't even know this. And the customer, the manufacturer, just sat there 15 minutes and gave them a ballpark. They said, yes. And then the manufacturer said, how about we help you reduce that from 5 million of wasted revenue to, let's say, 500,000 of wasted as a pilot project? Would you be able to share some of that revenue with us? And it was a very different way of pricing. There was nothing about what is the specification of your separator or nothing. I said, of course, you will buy the equipment separately. That is nothing to be discussed here. But if we can add that much value or reduce that much pain from your business, would you like to share some of the cake that we are making here? And that helped them really change the way they price. Now, coming to the revenue models themselves, pricing is, of course, very value driven in these conversations. This was an example of that value, but the format of it as well can be, we have found about 6 common ways of structuring revenue. It can either be, say, pay-per-use, which is what everybody thinks that they can do very quickly. Not so easy to put in practice. Of course, there's flat fee that, yeah, you pay us $500 every month for access to this asset. We'll guarantee uptime and so on. The most common and the most valuable that we have found is a hybrid model, where manufacturers, of course, try to be risk-free. So they have a flat fee that guarantee their costs and guarantees the availability of the equipment, but they get paid more or less depending on the profile of use. So there are some areas or some seasons where an equipment will be used more or less. During those periods, they would charge more, or there are some areas where it's not used very much. Let's take an air conditioner. Probably won't be used very much in the winter. Why do you want to charge the customer when the product is not being used? And they also try to structure their revenue models around that. I hope that answers some of the questions.
So it's almost like a salesman getting paid base pay and then a commission on top of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, the fascinating thing about this, tell me if I've got this wrong, but it's almost like the supplier becomes a consultant helping the customer understand their business, how they can improve it. And it really forces an in-depth conversation to be able to come up with that measurement methodology. Fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a very consultative form of selling. So you don't just change your business model in this, but it also changes the skills that are required to sell this service. And it has to be a very consultative form of selling. And we have seen, we work with not allowed to say the name, so I'll just hint. We work with one of the biggest packaging equipment manufacturers in the world, and they have a very interesting approach at this, that they will not go and just sell packaging because somebody wants it. They will go and speak to the customer who wants to make, let's say, orange juice. And they will say, you make great orange juice. You know what? We have found in the Philippines, there's a demand for XYZ type of orange juice. If packaged in this material with this color, we would like to enable you to get into that market. Would you like our solutions? Your entire approach is, I can make you more money. The product is just a vehicle to deliver that revenue. And it changes the game quite radically.
I could guess who that might be, but I won't say it. Did we, Per or Mark, did one of you have a question? Go ahead, Per.
Per, I think you're on mute.
Better?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was struck by your description of how you arrive at the price, because that's normally the way you would do it as well in value-based selling.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem was always that, once the customer kind of realized that this is the way we priced it, all of a sudden the information became very close to the vest. And you had to really rely on your people's experience and understanding of the customer process to kind of evaluate and guess. So by way of background, I'm a consultant, I'm a fractional CMO, and I work mostly with small manufacturing companies.
Right.
So resources is always an issue.
Mm.
And salespeople are never good. I'm exaggerating now, but really that's what we have. It's always, move the title, right, and get paid. So have you worked anything with like smaller companies? Do you have any thoughts around how to effectuate this in smaller companies? Because I have tried to work in this direction since the 1980s with mixed results.
Right. Okay. Yes, we have a lot of experience working with smaller businesses. So overall, we have worked with around 450 companies, out of which 300 have been SMEs, especially in the UK area. Mm-hmm. So we were funded by the Regional Development Fund, the European Regional Development Fund, to help generate that impact on businesses. And it's a very good point you raise. What we found as the critical factor in small businesses was the MD or the higher level being very convinced this is the way to go forward. Mm-hmm. And they started driving the change downwards. And being smaller organizations, that change wasn't very difficult to drive. However, when we thought a similar strategy would work in larger organizations, that wasn't the case. Even though the higher ups or the C-suite was very convinced on this, getting middle managers or other senior managers to actually do it became very, very difficult. And in terms of sales conversations, especially from, well, I wouldn't say especially from small businesses, but across both businesses, what we realized is finding the right customer is the best start here, and accepting that not all customers will buy it this way. There will always be customers who will want to buy it as a product. Don't try to convert them. But there are always customers who would want to depend on you more, who trust you more, and use that trust as a leverage to get those conversations. Because only those who trust you will share that level of information with you about how much money they are losing through downtime or whatnot. And they will trust you to not exploit them on that. Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to make them successful, you also want to be successful. And that's what we found is make sure that the manufacturers don't go public with this and say, it's available for everybody. Anybody can come and buy this. Mm-hmm. You won't see that uptake. And for small businesses, definitely it was the biggest thing was start on the top. And if they can really drive it, that would be the best way.
Parikshit, I love the point that Per just brought up here about how people clam up when they realize what you're doing. But tell me if this is part of it also. If I'm going to be probing the customer to find out what the value is, and I'm just going to take that information and charge more per pound or more per unit or something, they don't give us much. But if I'm having that conversation in order to figure out what the metrics are for performance-based, then maybe the objective that they're seeing me is maybe a little different. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the objective clearly becomes value adding rather than value capturing here. And I
Yeah.
think that might change the conversation. But yeah, it's the messaging. You have to be so careful here to not spook the customer in
Yeah.
such a conversation.
That's very good. Mark, you had a question. Thanks, Per.
Yes. So thank you, Parikshit, for that. What struck me is the theory of providing a service around the job to be done rather than the product is obvious. One thing I try, and you've just actually touched on, I'm glad that Per actually mentioned it, is having the idea and then doing it in practice is completely different, right? So, and you touched upon the difference between an SME and with a corporate. The corporate structure is optimized for selling product. They don't have any skills potentially probably around selling a service and all of these sorts of things. So is that what Advanced Services Group do too? Do you do a kind of change transformation consultation? Is that something that you get outside people in? Tell me about that change, the transformation process of going from product thinking to servitization thinking.
Right. So in terms of whether we do that or not, to be very open and very honest, no, we do not do organizational change for businesses. We do not put people into an organization to influence, but we do support businesses in cultural change. If they want to influence internally, how do you think about this differently? We do that through different ways. One of the common ways that we have done it is through training programs. So we are currently running a very large training program with an engine manufacturer for aeroplanes, where they want to start thinking about their new products differently. And this means getting cross-functional and cross-department buy-in, and to help them think about it differently. Not just the engineering guys or not just the sales guys, but how does finance fit into this? How does taxation fit into this? They need to know their role in this game as well. And the idea was, through this training program, we don't show them how to do it, but why to do it. And by understanding that, they have the capacity and capability to do these actions by themselves. And of course, if they need more support, they can come and ask for more support. But that doesn't take away, Mark, from the need for this transformation, especially in corporates. I mean, I feel like I'm in a therapy session where I can complain about how slow large businesses can be at these transformations. I've worked recently with a small business. For 2 years, I've been helping them develop a new business model on, they make steam boilers and they sell steam boilers to breweries to make beer and whatnot. They've been trying to create steam as a service. In the past 2 years, through the pandemic as well, they have reached their pilot stage with 3 customers. And we have been working with another manufacturer in a similar area for the past 4 years. And we are still figuring out the value proposition. And it is driven, of course, by the rigidity of corporate organizations and the obsession with the KPI. How many boxes did you sell this month? As soon as that conversation comes in, services are in the bin. Nobody wants to talk about services because, oh, it's in a pilot stage. Yes, but can we expect ROI next quarter or next week? That's not an innovation conversation. You're too early for that conversation. So corporates, of course, have that challenge, but at the same time, they have the resources to scale this very, very quickly. But it's, again, a thing of opportunity. If they don't do it, somebody else will and take the cake away. So I absolutely agree on the urgency for corporates on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a corporate background as well, so I know exactly what you mean. That's why I asked the question too. So yeah, we should talk a bit more. It's interesting there, and this idea that the startups always look up to the corporates because they've got the money, and the corporates always look kind of down to the startups because they've got flexibility. You take the best of both worlds, and there's some instances where that's being done, and it's linked to as well as that advice is the accountability and the structure and giving that space to do things with the right sort of metrics. But great, thank you.
Yeah. And it reminded me of a funny anecdote. We had an event in Birmingham called Servitization Live, where we tried to bring a lot of manufacturers into a space where they can exhibit these advanced services in real life. Because we see products in exhibitions, we don't see services in exhibitions. And that's what we wanted to create, that how can you demonstrate this? And at the end of the 3-day event, we had an award session, and we were awarding exemplars in this area. A lot of them were SMEs, and we had these massive conglomerates and corporates sitting in the crowd. And the MD, he went to them and he said, I hope this was useful for you, and we understand it might have felt very SME centric to you. Did you actually enjoy this? And they said, are you kidding me? This was the best part of the 3-day, which came off sort of an insult because we spent a lot of time in the 2 days as well. But he said, this was the best part because we realized we have forgotten the entrepreneurial spirit in the business. And we are so obsessed with matching our KPIs that innovation is just out. And these guys are so innovative and so quick at this, and we should definitely learn from them. So it changes the argument that yes, startups look up to corporates, but there's so much to learn the other way around.
Wow. Speaking of learning, this has been outstanding, Parikshit. I want to just check in, Scott. For the people we have emails, can we let them know this recording is available also? Would that be possible?
Yes, for sure. We'll send out a link to everybody whose emails I have, who's on the. If for some reason you're I mean, if you have this meeting on your calendar, I should have it. But if you're concerned, just send me your email and I'll make extra sure.
Yeah. Well, there's so much more. Any more? I have one last question if there's time. Any more questions? Okay. One of the things I'm fascinated with is we look at B2B companies as makers of materials, components, equipment, and even services. And you had some great equipment examples here, and I can see like maintenance and spare parts. But I'm also thinking for like materials and components, like material producer. What about maybe we recycle the drums? Maybe we take responsibility for end of life disposing and other things. Are you seeing a trend where it's going into equipment and components and materials?
Yes, and coincidentally, materials picking up on that. Only just yesterday and tomorrow I have a conversation with a materials manufacturer that makes PVC films and that sort of material for different applications, for waterproofing and so on. And they want to move away from just providing these as a service to providing guarantees around their availability and how long they last, taking them off, putting them again, renovation, replacement. So of course, it has major overlaps with the concept of circular economy, that you keep going and you retain the customer and help them reduce consumption. But at the same time, it raises a very important challenge that these industries specifically face. If you are a materials manufacturer, how many other players need to be contributing to the offering in order to get to the end customer? The more you start having those, the more complex your value network is. It's another term of value chain or ecosystems. So the more complex this value network is, the more strategically you have to decide who do I partner with and who do I bypass, because they hold power, these partners in the game. You cannot just bypass them if they can influence the end customer in decisions. So in order to make this happen, this is not just a business model innovation, but it is also a value network innovation where you start partnering with more, and it's a collaborative solution. That it's like the Reese's Buttercup, that you have to find the chocolate and the filling, and then you have the perfect solution. So we are working in that industry as well to help a business do something very similar.
So you could be working with certain co-suppliers, maybe even your customer. It's like a whole chocolate assortment box then. I love this. Yeah. That's great. That's fantastic. Parikshit, this has been wonderful, exceeded our expectations, very, very helpful. We're going to be working a lot more with you and your company. Yes. And I'd invite others, if you have questions, please reach out to Parikshit. And this is an exciting, evolving area, and we're looking forward to continuing it. So thank you for joining us, and everybody, thank you for coming. We really enjoyed your questions and you being here. So thanks, and everybody have a great rest of the day.